Audacious Rebel.
What would have spurred your transformation? What spoke into you from the environment you would have come from that shaped you to be where you are now? What shifted your trajectory?
A man. Wow. Wow. A man. A man. And that man name is Burvey Power Sr. The absence of a father draws. It's a statistic I read one day that said that a young man will more than likely engage in domestic violence 1,000 times more being raised in a home without a father, unless you have a moment with a man. There were many men that Brother Malcolm X impacted. Brother Malcolm X was impacted by a man in prison.
Yes.
And what shapes our manhood is how we are cultivated as boys, how we are developed as young men, how are we developed as a toddler, how are we developed as a teenager, how are we developed as an adolescent, how are we developed as a young adult. And it's that process of development, or the lack thereof, that speaks to and or contributes to a culture of violence, a culture of crime, a culture of indifference, a culture of disrespect, disregard, a culture of disturbance and disruption.
Audacious Rebel.
Before a bullet is fired, a robbery planned, or a life destroyed, there is often a boy, unseen, unheard, unknown. A boy growing into a man with questions no one helped him answer. And far too often, it's not lawlessness that pulls him in, but loss. Loss of purpose, of guidance, loss of identity. Crime at its root, it's not just a legal issue, it's a human one. And behind the statistics is a spiritual and psychological wound, especially in men, that too often goes untreated. This season, we've been exploring crime not as the end of the story, but as a starting point for transformation. And today, we go deeper into the soul of manhood, into the systems that shape it and the choices that break or build it. And to walk with us through this terrain, we're joined by a man who has stood at every intersection, from the pulpit to the prison visit, from the boardroom to the basketball court. A man whose life work is not about success, but significance. Dan D. Johnson is a business strategist, a real estate investor, a staff pastor, a leadership consultant, and a voice to this generation. He has delivered over 2,500 speaking engagements, mentored more than 1,500 young men, fed over 20,000 families, and built over 10 businesses. But what makes him extraordinary is not just what he's done, is what he's restored in others. He's helped men who were broken remember who they are. He taught leaders that power without purpose is empty. And he's here today to speak truth into one of the most urgent questions of our time. What is the true role of men in the cycle of crime, and how do we break it? This conversation isn't just timely, it's critical. So wherever you are, pause, lean in, because this episode of the Part of the Audacious Rebel isn't just content, it's a calling. So let's welcome the extraordinary, the relentless, the restorative, Dan D. Johnson. Welcome, sir.
My brother, listen, I don't know if I know how to be that dignified in my speech and in my opening presentation. So I don't know how to follow such lyrical genius. Uh, but what's going on, Mr. G, man?
You
What's
know, it's
happening?
something else because you have been my mentor for quite some time. And when I heard you speak for the first time, I said I wanted to sound just like this guy here. This guy here, one of the most prolific speakers I've ever heard in my life.
Man, you are most too kind. I would say this to you, that Edgar Allan Poe, you're from the lineage of Edgar Allan Poe. And you give poetic justice justice. And so that's the matter of fact.
No, but you're really amazing, Dan. I mean, I can recall that was what 17, 18 years ago.
Yep, it was
Hmm.
about that time.
Yeah, that's how
Man,
long we would have known
it
each other,
was
right?
about that time.
Hmm.
How are you, man? What's going on?
I am fabulous. I'm fabulous. I'm speaking to experts and leaders in the field. Of course, I had to get you on board because you're one of those. You're one of those that inspires, that enlightens, that really is on the cutting edge. So,
Man,
before we talk about crime or systems or solutions, though, I want to start with the man. You've walked in boardrooms, pulpits, prisons, and streets mentoring broken boys and building leaders. But tell me, when you look back over your own journey as a man, what was the moment that pushed you to the limit, that moment that almost broke you? And what did it reveal about manhood, pain, and purpose in our world today?
you know, I think to your point, before I ever got to a pulpit, before I ever got to a boardroom, um, I had to come through. I had to come through some rough terrain,
Hmm.
and it was the rough terrain that I came through where I had to make a decision when I got to a crossroad. And the decision that I had to make is what I wanted my life to look like 5 years from now. And that was a decision that was made at the age of 16, 17 years old. Because the community that I came from was one of the worst communities in the city of Chicago. I often tease and say cockroaches was my insects and rats were my pets. The community I came from was a community that was infested by drugs and violence and gangs. So much so that unfortunately my mother was a crackhead.
Wow.
My father was an heroin addict. I threw up my first gang sign when I was 4 years old. And that was from one of the OGs that my mother hung with that taught me how to put it up. I
Wow.
had my first drink when I was 2 years old, and that came from the can of a beer that my mother gave me.
Hmm.
It was my mother that taught me how to cook cocaine, bag cocaine, sell cocaine. And so, a lot of what I help people to understand is we don't grow out of the context of our culture. We grow into it. And unless there's some form of intervention, we become products of our environment. And then we allow the ills of that environment to take us under. And so, what we see, and which is why I can leave a community and go back to that same community 30 years later, and the community does not look different.
Hmm.
Because systematically, generationally, culturally, that community has taken ownership of an identity. And that identity transcends generations.
Wow.
And so the great 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 grandson becomes that of his grandfather. Now, if I brought the pulpit in the context of the conversation, then I'll give a biblical expression that simply says that the sins of our father visits us down to the third and fourth generation. So there has to be a breakage of generational curses that will allow us to be the difference maker in our lineage. And my goal, G man, is just to help people become the difference maker. My goal is to help young men say the buck stops with me.
Hmm. Dan, in those moments of personal struggle, based on what you've shared here, that's even hard for me to imagine. I've seen struggle, but you're talking about first drink at 2, cooking cocaine before you were 18, In those moments of personal struggle, what did you discover about the inner world of men that most people, especially society, fail to see or understand?
So when you think about what man does, the purpose of man, the first thing that a man does is dictate the picture of what society looks like. From a very scientific perspective, I determine whether or not you're going to be a boy or a girl. So then once I determine your identity, based on how I raise you, is going to help determine and shape your character and your personality. I did a post on social media. I'm the proud father of 5 children. And I posted 3 of my kids on social media, and they were just all doing silly stuff. They're just doing silly stuff just to be silly and be funny. And I said, these are Dan Johnson children. They're silly just like their father. We love to laugh. We love to have fun. We love to crack jokes. We're always talking about each other. You know, my daughter talks about my mama. I talk about her mama. We just have fun. But they are a mirror reflection of who their father is.
Right.
And even my oldest daughter, where we had a time of separation and things of that nature, she would look in the mirror and see her dad. Her work ethic and her desires and dreams and all of that stuff was in the DNA of who she was, that came from her father. And so the role of manhood is essential, and it starts with helping to shape the identity, the character, the nature, and the personality of the child. I don't know if that made sense.
No, definitely. Not just the child, because that is the foundation for society as well. And that identifies the same culture that you're just speaking about as you when you open.
Well, that's the whole point. You
Mhm.
said it goes the same with society. Society is made up of people.
Yep.
The culture is made up of people.
Hmm.
And the people are mirror reflections many times of their father or the absence thereof.
Correct. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that the way we define manhood in society is contributing to the dysfunction and crime? And if so, what's broken in the definition?
Ask that question one more time.
The
Where
way we define manhood in society, the way
okay.
it is defined, do you think that the definition in itself contributes to the dysfunction that we see in society and crime? And if so, what is broken about the definition?
Well, first of all, we got to look at what the definition is. So if I think there's several definitions of manhood. Manhood deals with the state or the mindset or the condition of being a man. So then what is that? Right? Not just biologically, but manhood is defined emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and socially. So what manhood is designed to do is to represent the mature expression of our masculine identity. But then here's the deal. What shapes our manhood? Are we understanding this? And what shapes our manhood is how we are cultivated as boys, how we are developed as young men, how are we developed as a toddler, how are we developed as a teenager, how are we developed as an adolescent, how are we developed as a young adult. And it's that process of development or the lack thereof that speaks to and or contributes to a culture of violence, a culture of crime, a culture of indifference, a culture of disrespect, disregard, a culture of disturbance and disruption. What do you mean by that? Let me give context. I have 5 siblings, and out of the 5 siblings I have, I am the oldest, and we all have different fathers.
Hmm.
And so what my mother did was It's five of us. And four of the five of us, four of my siblings, my mother named after me. So let's see, it's five siblings total. I'm the oldest. So three of the five siblings, my mother named after me. And she put the burden and the responsibility, because I was the big brother, to also be their father.
Hmm.
The fourth one, she didn't give my name. Now watch this. And the reason she didn't give my name, because the fourth one was a result of rape. So she says. So now I have this little sister who doesn't share my name. So she already comes in with rejection. You see. And everything that goes along with that.
Hmm.
And so the reality is, had I not been a big brother / father, with none of them having relationships with their dad, and our mother being who she is, they could have been turned out to anything. But you know what? I have a sister that was the first to get a degree. She's in social services. She's in the school system. I have another sister that's married with three beautiful children that works for Homeland Security. I have a little brother that works full time with me, and prior to working full time with me, he was the director of security of a major hospital in the system, and who's also a football coach and mentor and all of those things. I got um, another sister, the one that was dealing with rejection, that's getting her doctorates in psychology.
Hmm.
But the difference is who was present, who was speaking into their life. And that's how man helps to cultivate society. Now, guess what I had to do? Man, I started working, hustling before I was 9 years old. Why? Because mama be gone to jail for 2-3 weeks at a time. And now I got siblings to look after, specifically the one that's directly under me. I had a young man that I never had the privilege of mentoring, but I would see him in the hallway. And I never had the privilege of mentoring him because he was always absent from school. And one of the things I said, man, where you been? And he said, I was at Hargrove. Hargrove is a facility for juvenile delinquents. And I said, what are you doing? What are you doing back there? Every time I look up, you at Hargrove. He said, I got caught breaking into a home. And I said, man, you keep getting caught breaking into a home. You need to find you a new hustle. And he said, Mr. Johnson, you don't know how many times I didn't get caught. And then I said, but why are you doing it? He said, my mother have 8 kids. I'm the oldest. Many of us go to sleep at night without food. I do what I got to do to survive. Unfortunately, 2 years later, this young man, 8th grade, I'm sitting in the pulpit. I get a picture of him and another young man lying in blood with guns next to them because they were shot and killed trying to rob a liquor store. And so the truth of the matter is, when you talk about how manhood shapes society or contributes to the violence of society, I can't say that manhood contributes to the violence of society. I would say it's the absence of manhood that does.
Right.
Because when you think about manhood is characterized by responsibility, characterized by integrity, characterized by leadership and strength and self-confidence. What is responsibility? Responsibility is the appropriate response. You're not a man because based on your age. You're a man based on your maturity. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I thought as a child. I understood as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. There's a lot of grown folk, grown men that still indulging in childish things. I don't know if this is making sense.
No, of course, they say maturational age and chronological age is not necessarily the same. I think it was Ian Van Zandt that spoke about the difference between a male and a man And anyone could be a male once you got that XY chromosome, but it takes a certain degree of character to define a man. Now, I'm hearing you, and one of the things that's just crossing my mind is what would have spurred your transformation? What spoke into you from the environment you would have come from that shaped you to be where you are now? What shifted your trajectory?
A man. Wow. Wow. A man. A man. And that man name is Burvey Power Sr. That man was the father of my childhood best friend, who he and I was total opposites. I was in a gang, he wasn't in a gang. I got kicked out of 2 high schools. He was a National Honor Society member. Um, but for whatever reason, we had synergy. And I began to spend every day of my life with him. And his father took me in as his son.
Mm.
His father showed me what manhood looks like. His father showed me what being responsible looks like. His father was the guy that told the principal at the school, because his father worked at the school, and said, hey, listen, let him take the test. And if he passed the test, I'll be responsible for his behavior. And I took that test with a 1.9 GPA, 0.9. It was something really, really bad. And I took that test and I missed one question. I did an entire entrance exam to get into this high school after being kicked out of 2 high schools. So they accepted me because of a man. I got it into a school that is not easily to get into. I got into it because of a man that said, I'm going to be responsible for his behavior. Now, I wasn't an easy person to be responsible for. I got suspended 5 times. I went to school with a gun in my book bag just about every day. I was the chief of violations of a particular gang within the school, but he stayed consistent.
Mm.
And it was the consistency of who he was in my life, and having his son to be a representative of what life could look like, that caused me to change, that caused me to have a desire to change. And I'll tell you that pivotal moment. I'll never forget it. A gun. I was in my sophomore year of this school, and the school that I went to was positioned in a community where the dominant gang in that community was the opposite of what I represented.
Mm.
And one day I was on a bus stop with my girlfriend, and a young man decided to approach me with a gun, and he threatened me. And so I set up with my crew a hit. I'll never forget it. We planned it. It was a half a day of school. Um, I had all of the guns in my book bag. We met up at a certain point. I knew where the guys hung out. We walked up to them. I stayed back so they wouldn't know I coordinated the hit. And I said, light them up. Why one of the guys that was on our squad was my cousin. And he was shaking the dude's hand. While he was shaking the dude's hand, I said, light him up. And they start pulling the trigger. Boom, 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 boom. And we ran. I ran directly to the police for the school. And I said, officer, they shooting over there.
Mm.
And they went over there. And when they went over there, I detoured them, and everybody came with me. And we met up at our meeting spot. And I'll never forget, they were all in there laughing about it, smoking weed. And I'm grateful nobody died or anything like that. By the grace of God, I found out the next day that nobody died. And the person that did get hit recovered. Um, and they were laughing, man, they were laughing. And they was getting high and smoking weed, laughing. And I said to myself, I don't want to see the rest of my life like this.
Wow.
I don't want to live the rest of my life like this. And I dropped flag. What that meant was I got out the gang, and I had to fight my way out, and that was the turning point. But that's the long story of sharing with you, though. It was a man.
Wow, that was really something, though. Notwithstanding, that would have taken a lot of strength of will and character, because how many young men can say, I got out
Right.
alive?
Yeah. I got out without spending a bunch of time in jail. The maximum amount of time total that I spent in jail doing my craziness was probably about 4 or 5 days here and there. I
Right.
got out without, getting killed. I got one bullet graze. Um, I got out. But I would be remiss to say if I was to tell you that me getting out had a lot to do, not only do with that man, but had a lot to do with God.
Mm.
Because God gave me a vision for beyond where I was. And when without a vision, the people perish. That word perish means they become uncontained, unconstrained. They become wild. They have nothing to establish boundaries. And they don't live life for tomorrow. They only care about the moment. And that moment is to satisfy whatever need that they have. And because of the absence of a father, because of the absence of God operating in their life, they use illegitimate resources to fulfill legitimate needs.
Mm.
That young man was hungry. That young man needed clothing. That young man that I spoke about, he needed a place to lay his head. That was a legitimate need. But he couldn't but he utilized illegitimate, illegal resources to fulfill it, and it brought him to his deathbed. Every kid that I have, from the time they were young, as their father, not only did I give them their identity, but I helped to shape their purpose. I recognized who they were and put them in the best position to become the best that they can be. That's why, man, that's why fatherhood is so important. And in the absence of fathers, we need mentors. That's why I've personally mentored over 1,500 young men, and many of them I have relationship with today.
It's something, you've mentored over 1,500 young men. I'm hearing you now. And one of the questions I want to ask is, what do you believe is one of the most critical factors that draw young men towards crime? Is it the environment? Is it trauma, that identity confusion, or something deeper?
I think the answer is D, all of the above. Trauma has triggers, and trauma leaves traces. My trauma had triggers of anger and rage. My trauma led me to my trauma of child molestation um, led me to promiscuity. My trauma of homelessness or not having food to eat led me to selling drugs. And when you got to deal with trauma, the issues is that those things that you got to deal with, it begins to cloud your vision, distort your vision. It puts you in a mindset that says, I have to survive. Forget living, I just want to survive. So that's what draws the absence of a father draws. It's a statistic I read one day that said that a young man will more than likely engage in domestic violence 1,000 times more being raised in a home without a father.
Hmm.
You said environment, absolutely. Entertainment. I used to own a record label, and we'd do these videos. And while doing these videos, G man, We'll rent out houses, rent cars. They wear fake jewelry and all that stuff, and they put on this facade like they tough and all of that. And then we put it out there, and the young men look at it and aspire. That's what I want. And then we show that this is the way you're going to get it. And the truth of the matter is, when the video is over, the dude taking the car, we taking the car back. The dude getting on the bus. He going to live in his mama basement. The jewelry is fake anyway. It's going to turn green. You know what I'm saying? All of these things contribute. It's going to contribute to what our young men are dealing with. And sometimes, they just don't care no more. They don't care about themselves. You talk to young men and you ask them where you want to see yourself by the age of 30. They 30? Man, I don't even think I'm going to be here at 30.
Dan, I'm hearing you. And what you're sharing, it's nothing new. But my question is, this isn't anything new. This understanding isn't anything new. Why then is society still the way it is?
Because we have not many fathers. We have not many men to step up and go into the schools and to help to cultivate and to become a presence in the schools. Many of the school systems are being governed by women. Majority of what these young men interact with on a day-to-day basis is women. And so I think that's one of the things. I don't want to spiritualize it, but this is just who I am. The other piece is the world needs Jesus, bro.
Right.
The reality is the world needs Jesus. When you're left to yourself to figure yourself out and to make decisions based on self, you're going to get self. When you look at America, I know you're in Trinidad, but when you look at America, man, we need Jesus. There, and the Bible says that it's not until the righteous rule where the people are going to be able to rejoice. And when the unrighteous rule, man, the people are suffering. And what we see is a world where people are suffering. People, you don't grow up. I never grew up saying I wanted to be a gangbanger. I was listening to a podcast today from about a young lady who went from porn to the pulpit.
Mm,
But she didn't start off a little girl saying she wanted to be a porn star.
right.
As a little girl at 8 years old, she was molested by her babysitter's son. By 12, she was raped by the next door neighbor. By 13, she had given up her virginity to a 27-year-old pimp. By 14, she was stripping in strip clubs with a fake ID. This wasn't a life that she chose. Is this making sense?
Definitely. Based on what you're saying, what I'm wondering is, how do you think, based on this understanding, our justice system should be? Because our justice system is primarily punitive. How
It's
should our
primarily,
justice system be designed with the
and,
understanding that you have?
and you know what? Our justice system is not only primarily punitive, it's primarily economic.
Mm,
I don't know what the stats are in Trinidad, but in America, 66% of America's prison population is made up by brown and black people, which only represents about 13% of America's population overall. So when you begin to look at that, here it is, as blacks, we represent 13% of American population, but we're in the majority of imprisonment. And then when you go to prison, many of the prisons are owned by private sector, is in the private sector. And so now you manufacturing clothes, watch this, license plates for the government. It's institutionalized slavery.
mm,
And so there is no, matter of fact, there is not a lot of rehabilitation that happens in the prison. That's why the recidivism rate is so high.
yes.
People go to jail, come back out. They're not rehabilitated. They get sent right back to jail. Some of them want to go to jail because they don't know how to function in a normal society anymore.
Not only that, but even if there's rehabilitation in prison, the same environment that created you in the first place, that's the environment you're going to go right back into.
Unless you have a moment with a man. There were many men that Brother Malcolm X impact. Brother Malcolm X was impacted by a man in prison.
Yes.
And then he began to impact. So it goes back to that theme. The Bible says we have not many fathers. In our society today, we have not many men
It's
that's
something.
willing to take ownership of what they believe, watch this, is not their responsibility. That's not my child. That's not my son. That's not my daughter.
Right.
I'm taking care of mine.
And I guess if that was the mindset, you would not be who you are, because that man was not your biological dad.
He was not my biological father.
Right.
And I got 2 poster boards downstairs. And one of them is a real big poster board of that man. Then another one is a smaller poster board of my father. Both of them are now deceased. But I tell my dad, my biological father, on his last days of life, he was apologizing to me. And he said, I wish I could have been a better father. He said, D, you act like you my father. You took care of me better than I've ever taken care of you. And he said, I'm so proud of you, and he had all this regret and all of this stuff. And I said, hey, Dad, look, check this out. God could not have picked a better father for me. And he said, what do you mean? I was nothing to you. I said, you was everything to me. Because the reality is, had you been anybody else, I wouldn't be me.
Correct.
And I'm cool with me.
Correct.
My story would have been a lot different had you been anybody else. But my story helped to make me who I am today.
Right.
So you fulfilled your role in my purpose. And whatever you was, there, not there, supportive, not supportive, provider, not provider. It didn't matter, because the fact of the matter is you fulfilled your role in my purpose. And I'm grateful. And I love you.
That's something. Dan, you've worked with churches all over the world, businesses, civic leaders. Where have you think they failed men the most? And how can these institutions truly show up differently?
I think, unfortunately, there has to be a transformation of heart. It's hard to care about what you don't care about. It's hard to fight for what you don't believe in. And to your point, I've traveled all over the world, and unfortunately for Black and brown people, the story is still the same.
Yeah.
No matter where you are in the world, the story of oppression, suppression, lack of segregation, racism, division, all of those things, no matter where you are in the world, is still the same. The story, the historical context, G Money, is still the same. So where do we have to start? We got to start with the heart of a nation that have a desire to have a heart for all people. And in the absence of that, then we as a people got to develop a heart for each other. And so that's the thing. And we got to do it. Listen, everybody that's in the office, in any political office you go to, been voted in. That means somebody cast a vote. And the problem is we don't use our voice loud enough with our vote. So therefore our vote don't count. And when your vote can't be counted, your voice don't matter. We got to raise up leaders, political leaders, governmental leaders. We got to raise up leaders that have a heart for all people, righteous leaders, that's going to go and rule fairly, not just for the minority, but for the majority. That's that's where this thing has to. I mean, when you look at the educational system in the United States, our educational system, schools are funded by the property taxes by which they are in. So imagine this: if black and brown people are on the lowest totem pole in economics, that means they're living in more of the most impoverished communities. If they're living in the most impoverished communities, that means they're paying the lowest taxes. And if they're paying the lowest taxes, that means, guess what? They're getting the lowest quality of education, because it's the
Right.
property tax that determines how much money per child each student receives. So in a poor community like where I came from, you're getting $2,000 to $3,000 per kid per year to educate. But in our white counterparts, you're getting $22,000 per kid per year to
Mm.
educate. So once there is an educational divide, then now there's going to also be um, an achievement divide. There's going to also be a digital divide. And that's going to also create an economical divide. The reality is we just need the equal opportunity. I tell people all the time, I don't care whether you segregate a school or desegregate a school. Just make certain both schools got the same resources to educate.
Right.
Now I don't know if you meant for me to slip into that, but it pulled
That
me
was
right.
wonderful. That was wonderful. Of course, my mind was going all over because I'm also thinking in the impoverished communities, their diet will also not be the best. So their whole mental state, their biological state, everything is going to be below par when compared to those of the upper echelons in society. So it's
And
just totally imbalanced across the board.
it's imbalanced across the board. And guess what? We wind up paying more for bad stuff. We, in some of our communities, we got the corner store.
Yes.
The corner store is not owned by us. And the corner store provides convenience, but they make us pay 30-40% more for that convenience
Yeah.
because we don't have the means to get out to go to the regular stores that where the pricing is as such. And this is not only here. I just got back from South Africa. I walked into a store in the black community owned by somebody else, and half of everything I picked up expired, and they're still selling it.
Right.
And we as a people are still buying it. So for me, my mindset is I want to own every dang on corner store in our community. That's how we change.
Definitely. You spoke earlier about having your own record label. Do you believe, though, that the media plays a role in shaping toxic or distorted images of masculinity? And how does this influence the path some men take towards violence or rebellion?
Well, you got two kinds of media. You got entertainment media, and we talked about that earlier. So yes, I believe that it creates images in the mindset of people, and those images in the mindset of people will cause any individual um, to reach for something that doesn't exist.
Right.
Then you have the news media that, depending on the mindset of that particular outlet, is going to determine how they present us. In America, there was this big issue with immigration. So this big issue with immigration, anybody that was not American and that was immigrants was made to become a villain. They was made to become murderers and all of that kind of stuff. So then it incited fear amongst people. So I can't be around this person because what I saw on the news said that you were a murderer. You see what I'm saying? When even my city, Chicago is one of the greatest cities on the planet. It's my city. And in my city, because of politics, during the Obama era when he was running for president, there was this negative light shined on how violent the city of Chicago is. And then when you Google the top 10 most violent cities in America, Chicago don't come up. And the reason Chicago don't come up is because what you have to look at is the per capita.
Right.
In the city of Chicago, you may have 700 murders that take place in a year. Now, any loss of life is significant, but you're talking about 700 or so murders out of 2.4 something million people. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you highlight that, and everywhere I go in the world, the news look like the same when it comes to the people. When the local news look like the same as it does in Chicago. The only difference was because of a political agenda, this negative spotlight was shined on Chicago by media for the sake of politics. So media definitely plays a role. Media plays a role in how people look at African Americans. It plays a role. And police is called upon us, and we're guilty because we're black. It plays a role. And the truth of the matter is, and now the society and the culture by which we live, racism is now on the forefront. It was always been there, but people don't care no more. Police don't care about shooting a black man on the street because he know he going home that night.
And it's not
That's
just how
for real.
society looks at us, but how we look at ourselves. Because there's some deep conditioning that takes place with the media as well that convinces us that we are nothing, that we can't
And you
accomplish this, we can't do this, we can't be this, we can't do that. You know, so it's a holistic sort of conditioning that takes place.
and
You
so
know,
this is why we need men
Mm,
to rise up and speak truth to power. We need men to rise up and speak to the true DNA of what of our ancestors and our historical context. We wasn't, for whatever reason, the history that we've been taught as a people start with us as slaves. We were not first slaves. We were first kings.
correct.
And so we got to help young people to identify with the kingship and the authority that they walk in. And that it doesn't matter who your mother is. It doesn't matter who your father is. It doesn't matter what hood you come from. The only person that can stop you from being the best you possible is you.
Correct.
It doesn't, listen, your life is not defined by how it started. Your life, because you couldn't control the starting point, but you definitely can control the ending point.
Dan, you've been part of real transformation stories. Men who walked away from the edge.
Yeah.
What do you think is the turning point for most of them, and what changes or shifts their trajectory?
I think number one, having someone to say to them what I just said. Number two, helping them to cultivate vision. Vision gives your daily activity direction. Number three, helping them to understand that you may have sold drugs, but that doesn't mean you're a drug dealer. You may have been in a gang, but that doesn't mean you're a gangbanger. I think these are the true things that help change the trajectory. And of course, like I said, I'd be remiss if I did not say, really coming in contact with who created them for real, and that's the Lord. That's God. A God encounter would change the trajectory of anybody's life. A true God encounter will change the trajectory of anybody's life. A true, watch this. Darkness cannot exist in the presence of light. So what we have to do is we have to help turn the inward lights on.
Hmm. It's something you say that because, my next question was how important is spiritual identity in a man's transformation journey? And can we truly rebuild men without addressing the soul?
You cannot. And because the soul, when you talk about the soul, you're talking about the mind, how we think. And so when you deal with the mind, it says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. Transformation happens by the renewing of the mind. There has to be a paradigm shift in the mind. And whenever there's a paradigm shift, there's a change in the thought pattern and the thought processes of how we function. So when you talk about the soul, number one, you talk about the mind. Number two, you talk about the will, the desire. What is your desire? Most times the problem with many people is that we don't desire anything. So we accept everything.
Mhm.
We've been taught not to hope for anything, so we won't be disappointed by anything. So you got to deal with the desire of man. And then you got to deal with the emotions, with how we feel. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth begins to speak, and what the mouth speaks, the body begins to ultimately do. And so the only way change happens inside out is if God changes you.
Right.
Otherwise, you will have temporary peaks of progress. But when you when that when that when you if you don't replace it with God, if you don't replace darkness with light, darkness is coming back 7 times.
But let me ask something, because I don't want to make this, make it seems as though it's all religious.
If
When you
not,
say God, how does that align to Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism?
so I have to speak from my context, and my context is the context of Christianity. My context is the context of a believer, and that simply means when I speak of God, I speak of I speak of the Trinity. I speak of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I speak of Jesus not only being my Savior, but also being my Lord. And so the Bible says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So how do you develop a relationship with God? You develop a relationship with His Word. And it's in that development of a relationship with His Word that you begin to pursue obedience. And it is in the pursuit of obedience you begin to develop a relationship with the Holy Spirit. And it's those things that begins to cause the internal shift. Because a lot of times, and it has to be an internal shift, because one of the things I've learned is that our inward struggles creates our outward sins. And so if you can deal with the inward struggle, you'll get rid of the outward sin. And so I just didn't want to go so far deep into the context because you may have a diverse audience. And I want to make certain that because God is a God of principle, PLE, that if we speak the principles are going to work. And if you embrace the principles, then ultimately the goal is that you embrace the principal, the PAL. Um, and so I wanted to make certain that I didn't alienate anyone
Right.
by speaking more of the principal than the principle, because God honors the principle even when you don't honor the principal.
Understood.
Is this making sense?
Understood. Love it. In your mentorship work, what has been the most effective way you think to reach a man who has lost hope, trust, and vision?
By relationship, by doing life with them, by 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 meeting a need, and not and by giving them not just handouts, but giving them heads up, by holding them accountable to discipline, by challenging them when you need to challenge them, love them when you need to love them, and always love them not because of them but in spite of them. Those have been the things that have worked. I remember I had a young man who had killed a man. Well, he was in 8th grade. This young man killed a man in 8th grade and got away with it. And he was getting kicked out of school, and they told him he had to come to my mentorship program or they was gonna get rid of him. And he came to my mentorship program. He was the worst kid in the school. Dude just had, man, he was terrible. And I used to do these round tables where we'll just sit in a circle and we'll talk. And one day, my care for him became overwhelming to the point he said, Mr. Johnson, why do you care so much?
Mm.
And in that moment, I began to share why I cared. And in sharing why I cared, I spoke to their potential and not their problem. And I began to talk about how the words "I don't care" that young people often say becomes words of protection because they're trying to protect something.
Right.
They're trying to protect from being hurt again. They're trying to protect from being betrayed again. They're trying to protect from being disappointed again. So when you really get to the heart of the matter and you start caring about them and you're doing life with them, it opens up a certain level of trust where you can speak to them. And now you can speak life where there is no life. You can help cultivate vision where there is no vision. Is this making sense to you?
Definitely. You know, Dan, if you were tasked with redesigning the way society initiate boys into manhood, what would that process look like, and what would it absolutely have to include?
First and foremost, I would say that we would have to provide spiritual leadership. To me, um, we would have to lay a strong foundation of who we are in God, right? Um, that's the very first thing that I would do. I would deal with identity, who we are in God and who we are as individuals. The second thing that we must do is as men, so we got number one, spiritual leadership. Number two, we must present ourselves to these young men as protectors and providers. We got to protect them and we have to provide for them. We have to make certain that that we provide a safe space for them. We provide stability. We provide security for them. Then the third thing that I would have to consider is I would have to begin to build a culture of legacy. I tell my children all the time that the Bible says a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Now, most times we look at an inheritance as just tangible,
Hmm.
but your inheritance is your legacy. And you cannot, watch this, you cannot leave something you have not lived. So if I'm going to build a culture of legacy, then I got to live a culture of legacy. And I have to define what that culture looks like. So for me, there's 5 aspects of this culture of legacy. Number 1 is the aspect of faith. Number 2 is the aspect of family. Family is critical. The first institution that God ever created was not the church, it was family. Family is critical. Number 3, finances. I will raise these young men to be to be financially literate, fiscally responsible. I would teach those principles. All of my children are successful financially. Even my 13-year-old got money. And he'll brag, I make my own money. I pay for my own pedicure. Negro 13 getting pedicures, going to the massage parlor in Cano. So finances. Then the other one, which is so critical to me, is fun. Teaching them how to enjoy life, not to take life so serious. And so these are the things. And then the last one is freedom. Freedom to give back.
Right.
Freedom to live your life without the consideration of cost. This is the legacy that I live, which means this will ultimately be the legacy that I leave. And this is the legacy that will be repeated to the generations after me. So number one, spiritual leadership. Number two, protection and provision. Number three, you got to be a builder of legacy and culture. Number four, you got to model character and responsibility. Character and responsibility is so important because society depends on men to model discipline, courage, resilience, integrity. Um, when you're dealing with healthy manhood leads to healthy families, and ultimately it will lead to a healthy community. I'd say all the time, kids don't grow out of stuff; they grow into it.
Mm.
So, what is your child growing into? You can't. I don't live the life. Well, I've never told my kids do as I do and not as I say. I mean, do as I say and not as I do,
Right.
because they're going to do exactly what you do.
Correct.
And when I mess up, part of modeling character and integrity and responsibility is say I blew it. I don't say, well, I'm your father, I can do what I want. No, 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 no. I was wrong. I was out of order. That's not a representation of what a man looks like. Sons don't ever do that. That's how I am with mine. I allow them to call me on the carpet, hold me accountable to the spiritual truths and the principles that I raise you up in. And they do. And so those, that's the thing. The last one is collaboration. They say it takes a village to raise to raise a child. We are not above others. We're called to walk in partnership. We're called to walk in honor. We're called to respect women, mentor young people, serve our elders. It has to be a collaborative effort. So what do I mean by that? What do I do with my children? My children for the past decade, before they open a gift for Christmas, they give a gift. We
Mm.
literally do drive-by blessings on Christmas and bless 20, 30 families with Christmas gifts, and they didn't expect us to be there. I've taught them to work with the elderly, those type of things. That's to respect you don't call no grown person by their first name. You put a handle on it. You put a Mr. or Mrs. You put an uncle or auntie. You don't just call them back. No, it's this type of thing that when we do this in collaboration, I raise my sons. Listen, my daughter, 21 years old, in the presence of her brothers or her father, she will not carry a bag. If one of us don't grab that bag, she'll put that bag on the ground and it'll sit there. She won't open it now. She knows how because she's taught to be independent. But she holds these young men, my sons, her brothers, accountable. She's not going to open the door. She'll sit there and look at you like you crazy. Open that door. And she the youngest. Well, she's the youngest baby girl, and then my son is on. So they're always fussing. Dad, you just got her rotten.
Right.
I would tell my son, I would tell my my son mother, I say, listen, don't you dare carry a bag. Let him carry that bag. But he not gonna want to. I don't care if he want to or not. Only you care about that. Because if he's not obligated to take care of his mama, what do you think he gonna do with his wife?
Hmm. Correct. Dan,
That's that's what I would do.
we've been here for an hour. It seems like just a couple minutes. I'm learning so much. I now realize I need to be calling you more often. We don't talk enough, right?
Man,
But
to God
listen,
be the glory.
before before we wrap up, I want to give you the final word. If every leader, spiritual, political, educational, or otherwise, and every man trying to find his way was listening right now, what was the one truth? What is the one truth the world must embrace about the role of men if we are ever going to see transformation in our homes, in our streets, and our society? Just take a minute and speak from your heart.
I never knew who I was until I found out who Jesus was in me. You don't take a Mercedes Benz to a Ford dealer to have them fix it. You take it to the creator, the manufacturer. What's going to heal the broken heart of manhood is the God that created manhood in the first place. So it's got to start there. The second thing is learn to dream again. Sometimes our nighttime dreams of what could be have become our daytime nightmares based on what is.
Say that again.
Sometimes our nighttime dreams of what could be becomes our daytime nightmares of what really is. So as a result, I would say learn how to daydream. Even in the midst of what's not, dream about the possibilities of what can be. Because you'll never pursue what you don't see. And vision is designed to be seen first and then pursued.
Right.
And here's the deal. Don't give up too soon. If you do the right thing consistent enough, long enough, it will eventually be enough. That's what I would say for some man that's at a crossroad of saying, how do I get over this?
Right.
Get over it.
Now, Dan, for those who are deeply moved by what you shared today and want to connect with you, whether for mentorship, consultation, or speaking engagements, I know you do stuff all over the world. How can they reach you and follow your work?
DanDJohnson.com. If they go to DanDJohnson.com, that'll lead them wherever I am.
Good. And I'll include it in the description below this video so they could click on it there. So, to all my listeners, if this conversation stirred something in you, if it made you reflect, if it challenged your view of manhood, crime, or purpose, then I ask you to do 3 things: reflect, share, and act. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Let it be the spark for a deeper conversation in your home, in your circle, or in your community. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, click the notification bell and leave a comment below with what is your biggest takeaway. This is more than a podcast, it's a movement. It's a rebellion of truth, a restoration of soul. You're on the path of the audacious rebel, and this was just the beginning. Until next week, stay bold, stay awake, and stay audacious.
Audacious Rebel. Audacious Rebel.